My mother shoved a heavily notarized document across the kitchen island and ordered me to legally surrender all control of the family finances. So, I picked up her expensive silver pen, smiled directly at her, and gave her exactly the financial freedom she begged for. I was 16 the first time I desperately negotiated a payment plan with a ruthless collection agency over the phone. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the door locked, staring at a final notice for a $4,200 department store credit card, while Mom was crying in her bedroom down the hall. For 10 grueling years, that was my life. I balanced the checkbooks. I paid the $2,800 Denver mortgage every single month. I bought all the groceries, managed the utility bills, and kept my younger siblings, Jake and Mia, from starving. I skipped college entirely just to work full-time as a corporate bookkeeper to keep a roof over their heads. I tracked every dollar. I had to. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m., Mom staged a ridiculous intervention. She, Jake, who was now 20, and Mia, 22, sat me down in the living room. Mom slid a neatly stapled legal document across the granite counter. "You're way too controlling with the money, Sarah. Sign the primary account rights over to me today. We don't need a financial dictator holding us hostage anymore." My siblings stood right behind her, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was a tyrannical prison warden holding them captive. I carefully looked at the paperwork. They wanted full, unchecked access to the emergency fund I had meticulously built from nothing to $42,500, and they demanded I step down as the official household ledger manager. The document was drafted by some cheap online legal service, but it was stamped by a real notary. She had actually planned this. I signed it without hesitating for even a second. If you want total financial independence, it's yours. I packed my bags that very night and signed a lease for a quiet $2,100 a month loft apartment downtown. Monday morning, I didn't transfer the usual $300 weekly grocery allowance. Mom quickly discovered that refrigerators don't magically restock themselves with organic produce. Jake's cell phone got abruptly disconnected by Wednesday evening because I had removed my credit card from the family auto pay plan. Mia called me at work, furious and screaming that her luxury gym membership had bounced at the front desk. Mom got a $150 penalty fee from the HOO because she had absolutely no idea the $450 quarterly dues even existed, let alone how to log into the portal and pay them. By week 2, I got a desperate text from Jake. "Hey, transfer me $60 for gas right now. My tank is completely empty." I sent him a clear screenshot of the notarized document. That sounds like financial dictation. He angrily muttered something over a voice note about me being a psycho. He ended up walking 4 miles in the rain to his part-time job. The real catastrophic crash happened during Mia's lavish 23rd birthday dinner. She had confidently invited 20 of her college sorority friends to the house, expecting a fully catered, high-end event. I showed up exactly at 7 p.m., bringing only a cheap $15 bottle of wine as a standard guest. The house was absolutely freezing. Mom hadn't paid the $315 winter heating bill, and the utility company had throttled the gas lines that morning. When the professional caterer arrived demanding the $1,800 final payment up front, Mom's debit card declined twice. She panicked instantly, pulling me aggressively into the hallway while Mia's wealthy friends whispered and pointed. "Sarah, fix this right now. Pay the man," Mom hissed under her breath. I stepped right back into the living room, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear me clearly. "I can't do that. We had a formal household restructuring. I was told I was too controlling, so Mom is completely in charge of the finances for the first time ever. Isn't that right, Mom?" Mom's face went chalk white. I pulled the PDF of the contract up on my phone and showed the confused caterer. "I have zero legal ties to this property anymore." Mia burst into loud tears and locked herself in the guest bathroom. The caterer packed up the warm food and left immediately. Mom just stood there, totally frozen and humiliated in the freezing living room. I put my coat back on, left the cheap wine on the counter, and walked out. A month later, the severe consequences really hit. My phone buzzed with an automated email alert from the city's property registry. The house was officially in pre-foreclosure. They were 90 days behind on the mortgage. Mom showed up at my office building unannounced. She ambushed me in the busy glass lobby, her designer handbag looking incredibly out of place against her wild, panicked expression. People waiting for the elevators were staring. "The bank is taking the house," she sobbed hysterically, clutching a thick stack of final notice letters with red stamps. "Jake took $30,000 from the emergency fund for some stupid crypto investment, and it's all gone. We have nothing left." She shoved the crumpled letters into my chest. I caught them before they hit the floor. The top page was a formal notice of default. The past due balance was $8,400, plus late fees and legal costs. I thumbed through the next few pages. Bank statements. The $42,500 emergency fund I had spent my entire youth bleeding for was down to $412.18. There were dozens of wire transfers to a completely unregulated exchange platform. Jake hadn't just dipped into it. He had gutted it. He said it was a sure thing. Mom was hyperventilating now, grabbing the sleeve of my blazer. He said he was going to double the money and pay off the rest of the mortgage. "You have to fix this, Sarah. You have to call the bank. Tell them there was a mistake. Wire me the money to catch up the payments." I looked down at her hands gripping my jacket. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my sleeve. "I don't have $8,400 just sitting around to fix your mistakes," I said, keeping my voice flat and even. "And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you. You signed a legally binding document claiming total financial responsibility. You wanted the wheel. You're driving. I'm your mother," she shrieked. The security guard at the front desk stood up, his hand hovering over his radio. "You can't just let us go homeless. You're not homeless yet. You have 90 days to sell the house before they auction it." I handed the red stamped letters back to her. "Call a realtor." I turned my back on her and scanned my my badge at the turnstile. I didn't look back, not even when I heard her sobbing loudly as the security guard finally walked over to escort her out. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor, went to my desk, and drank my coffee. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to finish a quarterly reconciliation report. It hurt. It felt like 10 years of my life had just been set on fire in a trash can. But I didn't reach out to her. 3 weeks passed in absolute silence. No texts from Mia. No voicemails from Mom. Jake was completely off the grid. I started to think they had actually listened to me and listed the property. I even checked Zillow a few times, expecting to see the house pop up as a distress sale. Nothing. Then Thursday morning, I walked down to the mailroom of my apartment building. My mailbox was empty except for a stiff, oversized envelope requiring a signature from the front desk concierge. I took the envelope up to my loft and sliced it open with a kitchen knife. It was printed on heavy, expensive stock. The letterhead read Silas Brennan, attorney at law. I skimmed the first paragraph and felt the blood drain completely out of my face. It was a formal notice of intent to sue. Mom and Jake hadn't listed the house. Instead, they had found a bottom-feeding lawyer to draft a civil complaint against me. The letter alleged that during my 10 years as the unlicensed financial manager of the household, I had systematically embezzled funds from the family estate. They were claiming that the $30,000 Jake lost in crypto was actually money I had hidden in offshore accounts before the handover, and they were threatening to file a police report for financial elder abuse if I didn't immediately reimburse the missing $30,000 to save the house from foreclosure. I read the last paragraph 3 times. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly still. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach, quickly replaced by a sharp, clinical focus. Financial elder abuse. Mom was 52. She wasn't a fragile senior citizen. She was just chronically incapable of delayed gratification. But the threat was real. A police report meant an investigation, and in my line of work, an investigation into financial misconduct was a career death sentence. As a corporate bookkeeper, my entire livelihood depended on being uncompromised and perfectly ethical. They knew exactly what they were doing. Or, more likely, Silas Brennan knew exactly what he was doing. They had given him a sob story, and he saw a quick, easy shakedown. He figured I'd panic, hand over the $30,000 to protect my professional reputation, and he'd take his cut while the rest caught up the mortgage. I didn't panic. I went straight to my laptop. When I moved out, I didn't just leave a piece of paper on the counter. I had exported 10 years of CSV files, bank statements, tax returns, and utility receipts. I had a digital vault on a secure external drive that chronicled every single penny that had entered and exited that house since I was 16 years old. Every grocery run, every mortgage payment, every time I bailed Mom out of an overdraft. But I couldn't ignore a formal legal threat. I needed my own representation. I picked up my phone and called Garrett Voss. Garrett was a senior partner at a mid-sized civil litigation firm downtown. My company handled their payroll, and I had personally done Garrett's complicated tax returns for the last 3 years after his messy divorce. We had a solid, pragmatic relationship. He squeezed me in at 2 o'clock that afternoon. His office smelled like lemon polish and old paper. I slid Silas Brennan's letter across the heavy mahogany desk. Garrett read it in silence, tapping a gold pen against his notepad. When he finished, he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Silas Brennan, Garrett said, shaking his head. The man is an absolute clown. He operates out of a strip mall next to a vape shop. He throws these explosive demand letters against the wall, hoping people will just pay to make him go away. It's extortion dressed up as civil litigation. Can he actually file a police report for elder abuse? I asked. He can try. But your mother is in her early 50s, employed, or at least employable, and signed a notarized document demanding control of the estate. Garrett leaned forward. Do you have that document? I pulled a thick manila folder from my tote bag and handed it over. I have the original transfer agreement. I also have the last 10 years of bank statements, completely reconciled. And I have the IP logs and timestamps from the bank showing that the $30,000 wire transfer to the crypto exchange was authorized from Jake's phone, using Mom's newly created login credentials 3 weeks after I surrendered access. Garrett raised his eyebrows, visibly impressed. You kept IP logs? I'm a bookkeeper, Garrett. I don't leave loose threads. Good. He flipped through the stack of papers. This is bulletproof. I'll draft a response to Brennan today. I'll include a selection of these statements and the IP logs. I will inform him that if he proceeds with this frivolous claim, we won't just seek dismissal. We will countersue for defamation, malicious prosecution, and seek immediate sanctions against his license. He'll drop it. Guys like him don't want to actually work. They just want the easy payout. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Thank you. Just bill me your standard hourly rate. I don't care what it costs. I just want them gone. Let's not celebrate just yet, Garrett said, turning to his computer monitor. While I have you here, let me pull the public property records on the house. If they're in pre-foreclosure, I want to see exactly who holds the debt and when the auction date is set. Sometimes these bottom feeders look for structural loopholes in the deed to stall the bank. I sat back in the leather chair, watching him type. The tension in my shoulders was finally starting to loosen. Mom and Jake had overplayed their hand. They thought they could bully me one last time, but the real world didn't work like our toxic living room. There were rules. There was paper. That's interesting, Garrett muttered, frowning at the screen. What? He clicked his mouse a few times, leaning closer to the monitor. The silence in the office suddenly felt heavy. Sarah, you said the primary mortgage was the only debt on the house. Is that right? Yes, I said. We bought it 10 years ago. It was refinanced once for a better rate, but there are no other liens. I managed it perfectly. When exactly did you sign that notarized handover document? October 12th. Garrett turned his monitor so I could see it. It was a digital scan of a county property record. On October October 19th, exactly 1 week after you moved out, a secondary lien was placed on the property. A title loan, high interest, short term, issued by a private equity lender. My stomach plummeted. A title loan? For how much? $50,000, Garrett said quietly. That's impossible, I stammered, leaning forward to read the screen. Mom doesn't have the credit for a $50 gas card, let alone a $50,000 loan. The bank would never approve her. You're right, she didn't have the credit. Garrett scrolled down to the signature page of the digital document. But you do. I stared at the screen. The blood rushed in my ears, drowning out the low hum of the air conditioner. Right there, at the bottom of the loan agreement, listed as the primary guarantor, was my name. Next to it was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. They forged my signature, I whispered. Garrett pulled the monitor back. His face was entirely grim now. And because your name was still technically on the deed from when you helped them refinance years ago, the lender didn't question it. Your mother must have taken your old tax returns and pay stubs that you left in the house to prove income. I felt dizzy. The $30,000 Jake lost in crypto wasn't just the emergency fund. They had burned through the emergency fund on past due bills, Mia's party, and whatever else they wanted. The crypto money came from this loan, a loan attached to my name, my credit, and my future. They didn't just mismanage the finances, Sarah, Garrett said, his voice dropping into a strictly professional, urgent tone. They committed felony wire fraud and identity theft. And if this private lender forecloses, they won't just take the house. They will come after you for the deficiency. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely audible. We stopped playing defense, Garrett said. He reached for a fresh legal pad. You need to freeze your credit immediately, right now, sitting in this chair. Then, we are going to walk down to the police precinct together. If I report this, my mother goes to prison. If you don't report this, Garrett countered, you go bankrupt, you lose your professional licenses, and you might take the fall for the fraud yourself. I pulled my phone out with shaking hands and opened my credit monitoring app. I hadn't checked it in 3 weeks. When the dashboard loaded, a bright red alert banner flashed across the top of the screen. My score, which had been a pristine 810 for years, had plummeted to 540. Under the recent inquiries tab, there were 14 hard pulls in the last 10 days. Auto loans, department store cards, personal lines of credit. Mom and Jake hadn't just forged my signature on the house. They were systematically burning my identity to the ground to keep their lifestyle afloat. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. I sat there in the leather chair, watching the little spinning wheel on my phone screen as I tapped the freeze button on the first credit bureau. Equifax. The screen flashed green. Locked. I moved to Experian. Locked. TransUnion. Locked. I did it mechanically, my brain detaching from the reality that I was shutting down my own financial existence, just to stop my mother from stealing any more of it. Garrett didn't say a word while I did it. He just printed a blank FTC identity theft affidavit from his computer, the heavy printer humming in the quiet office. He slid the stack of paper across the desk, tapping the signature line with his gold pen. Fill this out, he said. List the title loan, and list every single hard inquiry on your credit report that you didn't authorize. We need a complete inventory of the damage before we walk into the precinct. I took the pen. My hand was steady now. The initial shock had burned off, leaving behind a cold, hollow anger. I spent 20 minutes writing down dates, amounts, and account numbers. A $12,000 personal loan application, 5 different credit cards, an auto loan inquiry from 3 days ago. They hadn't just taken out the title loan on the house. They had treated my social security number like a blank checkbook. When I finished, Garrett put the affidavit in a manila folder, grabbed his suit jacket, and held the door open for me. The walk to the downtown precinct took less than 10 minutes. The wind was bitter, cutting through my thin blazer, but I barely felt it. The police station wasn't like the ones on television. There was no dramatic lighting, no bustling detectives. It just looked like a tired DMV. It smelled of cheap floor wax and wet wool. We took a number and sat on hard plastic chairs until a desk sergeant called us over to a scratched plexiglass window. His name tag read Mercer. Garrett did most of the initial talking. He slid the folder under the glass slot. My client is here to report multiple counts of identity theft and wire fraud. We have the FTC affidavit, the fraudulent loan documents, and the IP logs tying the activity to her immediate family members. Officer Mercer sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion, and opened the folder. He skimmed the first page, his eyes flicking up to look at me. The primary suspects are your mother and brother? Yes, I said. My voice sounded completely flat. You understand that by filing this official report, you are initiating a criminal investigation? If the district attorney decides to press charges, you can't just take it back because you feel bad at Thanksgiving. This goes on the record. I understand. He pulled a keyboard toward him and started typing. The clacking of the keys echoed in the quiet lobby. I need you to sign the final complaint form here, here, and here. Initial the bottom. He pushed a blue form under the glass. I picked up the chained pen. I had just signed the second line when my phone started vibrating furiously in my pocket. I ignored it, moving to the third signature line. It stopped, then immediately started vibrating again. Same number. A local Aurora area code. You should take that, Garrett murmured, noticing the urgency. I put the pen down and answered. Hello? Hi. Is this Sarah? The voice was male, fast talking, with the forced cheerfulness of a salesman. This is Reed Durbin over at the Toyota dealership on Havana. I'm the finance manager here. We've got your brother Jake sitting in my office right now, trying to drive away in that 2024 Tacoma. But we just hit a snag. I froze. Garrett noticed my posture change and stepped closer. What kind of snag, Reed? I asked. Well, we had the financing all lined up with you as the primary guarantor, but when I went to pull the final authorization 5 minutes ago, your credit file came back entirely locked. Total freeze across all 3 bureaus. Did you accidentally trigger a fraud alert on your app? Jake was sitting in a dealership. He was trying to buy a $45,000 truck stuck in my name, right at this exact second. Read, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty police lobby. I did not authorize that purchase. I am currently standing in the downtown police precinct filing felony identity theft charges against my brother. If Jake is sitting in your office, do not give him the keys. He is committing fraud. The line went dead silent. In the background, I could hear the faint sound of a dealership intercom. Oh my God, Reed whispered. His salesman voice was completely gone. He's sitting right across from me. He told me you were at work and couldn't come in to sign. Tell him the police are involved, I said. See how fast he runs. I have to call my general manager. I have to go. Reed hung up. I lowered the phone. I looked at Garrett, then at Officer Mercer through the plexiglass. My brother is currently at a Toyota dealership in Aurora trying to finalize an auto loan in my name. Mercer stopped typing. Did he get the car? No. The credit freeze I placed 20 minutes ago blocked the final pull. Good. Mercer slid the blue form back toward him. That saves you one massive headache, but it means they know the well is dry. Jake is going to figure out why he got denied real fast. Mercer handed me a card with a case number written on the back. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit will be in touch by the end of the week. Do not answer any calls from your mother. Do not answer any calls from your brother. If they show up at your apartment, do not open the door. Call 911 and reference this case number. Garrett walked me back to my office building. We didn't say much. There wasn't much left to say. The machinery was in motion now. I thanked him, went back upstairs to my desk, and worked the rest of the afternoon in a state of numb efficiency, reconciling ledgers, approving payroll, managing other people's money because mine was currently a crime scene. I left work at 6. The sun was already down. I unlocked the door to my loft, turned on the kitchen island lights, and dropped my keys on the counter. The silence of the apartment usually felt like a luxury. Tonight, it felt like a waiting room. At 7:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mia. I stared at the caller ID. Mercer had told me not to talk to Mom or Jake. He hadn't explicitly mentioned Mia. She had been at the sorority dinner. She had cried in the bathroom. But as far as I knew, her name wasn't on the title loan, and she hadn't been the one trying to buy a truck today. I swiped to answer. Mia, Sarah, she gasped. She was crying so hard she was hyperventilating. The background noise on her end was chaotic. I could hear glass shattering, followed by a muffled, booming shout that sounded exactly like Jake. Mia, what's going on? Are you safe? I'm locked in my bedroom, she sobbed, her voice a tight, panicked whisper. Jake just got home. He was screaming. He threw a dining room chair through the sliding glass door. He said you locked him out of the money and called the cops. Mom is throwing things at him, telling him he ruined everything. They're going crazy, Sarah. Mom is completely drunk and she's trying to pack a suitcase, but she can't even stand up straight. I closed my eyes. The reality of what had happened at the dealership had hit the house like a grenade. Jake hadn't just lost the truck. He had lost the illusion that he was untouchable, and Mom realized her human ATM was officially closed by the state authorities. Listen to me, Mia, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. You need to leave the house right now. Don't pack a bag. Just grab your purse, climb out your ground floor window if you have to, and call an Uber. Do not walk through the living room. I don't have any money for an Uber, she cried. My debit card declined yesterday. I have nothing. Of course she didn't. The crypto drain had wiped out everything, including whatever allowance Mom had promised her. I'll order the car for you, I said, pulling up the app on my phone while holding her on speaker. It will be at the end of the driveway in 4 minutes. Get out of the house, Mia. Can I come to your place? She pleaded. Please, I don't have anywhere else to go. Her friends won't talk to me after the caterer incident. I hesitated. Letting anyone from that house into my sanctuary felt like a massive risk. I had spent 10 years playing the savior, and it had almost resulted in $50,000 of fraudulent debt tied to my neck. But Mia was 22, historically oblivious to the finances, and currently trapped in a house with a brother who was violently destroying furniture. You can stay on the couch for one night, I said. The car is 2 minutes away. Get out now. I hung up. I paced the length of my hardwood floor for the next 20 minutes until the security buzzer downstairs rang. I went down to the lobby myself. Mia was standing inside the double glass doors, shivering. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and a stained hoodie. Her face was red and blotchy, her mascara smeared down her cheeks. She looked nothing like the entitled girl who had demanded a catered luxury birthday dinner a few weeks ago. She looked like a terrified kid. I swiped my fob, let her in, and led her up to my apartment in silence. Once inside, she collapsed onto my sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it on the coffee table in front of her. Drink that, I ordered. She picked it up with shaking hands and took a sip. Jake was screaming that you're trying to send him to prison, she whispered, staring at the water glass. He said you were framing him for a loan. I sat down in the armchair across from her. I wasn't going to soften this. I wasn't going to protect her from the truth anymore. I'm not framing anyone, I said flatly. Mom and Jake took out a $50,000 title loan on the house. They forged my signature and used my old tax documents to push it through. Jake lost $30,000 of it in crypto. Today he tried to buy a Toyota Tacoma using my social security number. I froze my credit and filed a felony police report for identity theft. That's why he's screaming. Mia stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from her face. 50,000? She finally choked out. But Mom said you were hoarding the money. She said you had a secret offshore account, and she just needed my help to bridge the gap until Mr. Brennan forced you to give it back. My blood ran completely cold. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. What do you mean, until Mr. Brennan forced me to give it back? I asked slowly. And what do you mean, your help? Mia looked down at her lap, her breathing turning shallow. She started picking frantically at the cuticle of her thumb. When you moved out, and the heating bill bounced, Mom was panicking. She said we needed immediate liquidity. Liquidity, I repeated. The word sounded ridiculous coming from Mia, who hadn't known what an hoe fee was 3 weeks ago. ago. Mom doesn't use words like liquidity. Who used that word, Mia? The guy at the title place, she whispered, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. When Mom went to get the loan, they told her she couldn't use just your signature without a secondary, physically present co-signer for the cash release, because the deed had a dual-party requirement from the refinance. I gripped the arms of the chair. The room was spinning slightly. Mia, what did you sign? She looked up at me, absolutely terrified. Mom told me it was just a procedural form, a temporary bridge loan against the equity. She said since I lived there, I qualified as a resident guarantor. I gave them my driver's license, Sarah. I signed where they put the sticky notes. She hadn't just forged my signature. Mom had walked her youngest daughter into a predatory lending office and made her the legal anchor for a fraudulent $50,000 loan. Before I could even process the magnitude of what Mia had just confessed, my cell phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a call. It was a text message. The screen lit up with a number I hadn't seen in over 3 years. It was my father. He had abandoned the family when I was 12 and moved to Nevada, leaving the mortgage and the mess entirely in Mom's lap. He had never once sent a dime in child support. The message preview read, Sarah, I just got a very confusing phone call from a detective in Denver asking about my name on the original property deed. What the hell is going on over there? I didn't text back. I tapped the phone icon at the top of the screen and put the receiver to my ear. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when the line clicked open. Sarah? The voice was older, rougher than I remembered, with a heavy smoker's rasp that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Conrad, I said. I hadn't called him Dad since I was 14. Why is the Denver PD calling you? That's what I want to know, he snapped, his voice instantly defensive. Some guy named Detective Fletcher called me 20 minutes ago, asked me to verify my social security number and confirm if I still had any equity stake in the Denver property. I told him I signed a quitclaim deed a decade ago during the divorce. He said the county clerk's office has a secondary lien filed last week with my name listed as a historical guarantor to bypass a title flag. What the hell did your mother do? I closed my eyes and rubbed the bridge of my nose. When Mom and I refinanced the house years ago to keep it out of foreclosure the first time, I had hired a cheap notary to finalize Conrad's quitclaim deed, but Mom had taken the paperwork to file it with the county herself to save me the afternoon off from work. She never filed it. She kept his name attached to the property history as a phantom safety net, just in case she ever needed his credit history to buffer hers. And last week, when the private equity lender ran the title search for the $50,000 loan, it flagged his name. So she didn't just forge my signature, she forged his too. She took out a fraudulent title loan for $50,000. I told him, my voice completely flat. She forged my signature, and apparently she forged yours on a secondary waiver to push it through. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background, maybe a sports game. Then, Conrad let out a low, bitter laugh. That makes perfect sense, he muttered. What do you mean? Because she called me last Tuesday, Conrad said. First time I've spoken to her in 3 years. She was crying hysterically. Told me you had locked her out of her own bank accounts, that you stole her retirement savings, and she desperately needed me to wire her $10,000 for a bridge loan to keep the house. I told her to lose my number and hung up on her. A cold, heavy knot settled in my chest. She had tried to con him before she walked into that title office. When he said no, she just decided to steal both our identities instead. I filed a police report today, I said, for identity theft. That's why the detective is calling everyone on the deed. If I were you, I'd freeze your credit tonight. She has your social security number on an old tax return somewhere in that house. I'm calling my lawyer, Conrad growled. I'm not going down for her garbage. Do what you have to do, I said, and hung up. I tossed the phone onto the kitchen island. Mia was still sitting on my couch. She had stopped crying, but her eyes were wide, tracking my every movement like a trapped animal. She had heard enough of my side of the conversation to know things had just gotten exponentially worse. I walked over and stood in front of the coffee table, looking down at her. Mia, I said, keeping my voice low but absolutely firm. You didn't just sign a procedural form. You co-signed a fraudulent loan. You provided your government ID to secure $50,000 that your brother immediately stole. You are an accessory to felony wire fraud. She flinched as if I had hit her. I didn't know. Sarah, I swear to God I didn't read it. She just pointed to the sticky notes and told me to sign. It doesn't matter if you read it. The law doesn't care if you were naive. Your signature is on the document next to a forged version of mine. I crossed my arms. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock you are coming with me to my lawyer's office. His name is Garrett. You are going to sit in his chair, and you are going to dictate a sworn affidavit stating exactly what Mom told you, what she made you sign, and who was in the room when she did it. If I do that, Mom goes to jail, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Mom is going to jail anyway, I said bluntly. The only question right now is whether or not you're going with her. Jake is already implicated. He tried to buy a truck with my credit today. They are both going down. You can either be a co-conspirator, or you can be a witness for the prosecution. Pick one. Mia buried her face in her hands and started to sob again, the deep, ugly kind of crying that comes when reality finally shatters a delusion. I didn't sit down next to her. I didn't rub her back. I just stood there and let her cry it out. I had spent 10 years buffering them from the consequences of their actions. I was done being the shock absorber. Suddenly, the intercom buzzer on the wall near my front door let out a loud, jarring electronic screech. Mia gasped and looked up, her tear-streaked face pale. I walked over to the panel and pressed the video button. The small, grainy black and white screen flickered to life. Standing in the vestibule of my apartment building was Mom. She looked entirely unhinged. Her hair was matted to one side of her face, and her trench coat was buttoned unevenly. She was swaying slightly on her feet, holding a large, overstuffed soft canvas tote bag in one hand. With her free hand, she was frantically mashing the buzzer for my apartment, over and over again. Through the tiny speaker, I could hear her muffled, slurred voice echoing in the lobby downstairs. Sarah, open the door. I know you're in there. I know you took her. Open the door right now. Mia stood up from the couch, her whole body shaking. Is that her? Yes, I said. I didn't take my finger off the video button. I just watched her mash the keypad. Sarah, please. Mom wailed into the intercom, her voice cracking. Jake took the car. He left me. You have to let me in. We need to talk about the lawyer. We can fix this as a family. Just let me upstairs. I reached out and pressed the talk button. You have exactly 30 seconds to get off the property before I call the police, I said into the microphone. Mom froze on the screen, staring up at the camera lens. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you life. You owe me. You're trying to ruin us over a stupid mistake. She started kicking the heavy glass door of the lobby, her boots thudding dully against the reinforced pane. Give me back my daughter. I took my finger off the talk button and picked up my cell phone. I pulled up the contact card Officer Mercer had given me at the precinct and dialed the non-emergency dispatch number. Yes, I said smoothly when the operator answered. I have a trespasser violently kicking the glass doors at my apartment building. I have an active police report filed against her for identity theft. Case number 448B. I need an officer to remove her immediately. The dispatcher asked for my building number and confirmed a unit was already in the area. 3 minutes, she said. Stay inside. I didn't hang up. I just lowered the phone and watched the grainy monitor. Mom kicked the glass twice more before she seemed to lose her balance. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the wet pavement, and she went down hard. Her designer bag tipped over, spilling a chaotic mess of old receipts, loose makeup, and crumpled mail onto the concrete. She didn't even try to pick it up. She just sat there on the ground, leaning against the brick facade of the building, her head in her hands. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of Mia's socks on the hardwood. She stepped into the narrow hallway and looked over my shoulder at the small screen. Then, the flashing red and blue lights painted the lobby glass. A standard patrol cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers got out. They didn't rush. They walked up to Mom with the slow, cautious posture of cops who deal with intoxicated disturbances every single night of the week. I watched one of them shine a heavy flashlight directly into her face. Mom threw her hands up to shield her eyes, scrambling to her feet. Even without audio, I could see the frantic, theatrical way she was pleading her case. She kept pointing at the building, then pointing at her spilled bag, then making wide, sweeping gestures. The taller officer just shook his head, reached out, and grabbed her by the wrist. Mom tried to yank her arm away. It was a stupid, reflexive movement, but it was enough. The second officer stepped in. Within 10 seconds, they had her turned around and pressed against the brick wall. They weren't gentle. They're putting handcuffs on her, Mia whispered, her breath hitched, catching in her throat. Sarah, they're arresting her. I see it. You have to go down there. Tell them to stop. She's just drunk. She's just mad. I turned around and looked at my sister. The coldness in my chest had frozen solid. She didn't come here because she's mad, Mia. She came here because Jake took the car she bought with stolen money, and she needed a new place to hide. She came here to manipulate me into dropping a federal crime. I am not going down there. We stood there in silence and watched the rest of it play out on the tiny screen. Mom didn't go quietly. She went entirely limp, forcing the 2 officers to practically drag her by the armpits toward the back of the cruiser. When they finally shoved her into the back seat and slammed the door, the lobby was empty again. Only her spilled purse was left on the pavement. Go to sleep, Mia, I said, turning off the intercom monitor. We have to be at Garrett's office at 9. Neither of us slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my loft, listening to the hum of the city, running the math in my head. I mentally calculated the legal fees, the timeline for a fraud investigation, and the sheer administrative nightmare of unwinding a $50,000 lien. By 8:45 a.m., we were sitting in the waiting room of Garrett's firm. Mia looked like a ghost. She had borrowed a clean sweater of mine, but it swallowed her narrow frame, and she hadn't spoken a single word since we left my apartment. When Garrett's paralegal called us back, Mia walked with stiff, robotic steps. Garrett was sitting behind his mahogany desk. He had a digital audio recorder sitting perfectly in the center of the leather blotter. He didn't offer us coffee or engage in small talk. He looked at Mia, then looked at me. Is she ready to go on the record? He asked. Yes, I said. I nudged Mia toward one of the heavy client chairs. Sit down. Garrett pressed a button on the recorder. A small red light blinked on. He stated his name, the date, and the time, then looked directly at my sister. State your full name for the record. Mia. Mia Lauren Whitfield. Her voice was a thin rasp. For the next hour, Garrett surgically dismantled her. He wasn't cruel, but he was entirely devoid of sympathy. He asked her to walk through the exact timeline of the day they visited the private equity lender, Apex Financial. He made her describe the office. He made her describe the loan officer, a man she remembered only as Duncan. Did Duncan ask to see Sarah's physical identification? Garrett asked, leaning forward, his gold pen hovering over a notepad. No, Mia sniffled, shredding a tissue in her lap. Mom handed him a folder. She said it had all the required documents, Sarah's old W-2s, a copy of her birth certificate, and some tax forms. Mom told Duncan that Sarah was at work and had pre-signed the guarantor forms that morning, and Duncan accepted that. He said it was highly irregular. But Mom, she started crying. She told him our house was going to be auctioned on Friday, and she just needed the bridge capital to save her children's childhood home. She begged him. Mia looked down at her lap. He told his assistant to push it through. Garrett let out a slow, deeply cynical sigh. Predatory lending at its finest. They saw a desperate woman with prime collateral and decided to look the other way on basic compliance. They wanted the house. They didn't care whose signature was actually on the paper. He turned his attention back to Mia. And when Duncan put the final contract on the desk, what What did your mother tell you to do? She told me to sign the resident affidavit, Mia whispered. She pointed to the yellow sticky flags. She said because my permanent address was on the deed, I just had to confirm residency to release the funds. Did you read the document, Mia? No. Did you notice the bold print at the top of the page that read Secondary Guarantor Liability Agreement? Mia squeezed her eyes shut. Tears spilled onto her cheeks. No. Garrett clicked his pen and turned off the recorder. The sudden silence in the room felt heavy. He looked at me. This is good, Garrett said, his voice dropping into a strictly pragmatic tone. It confirms willful fraud on your mother's part and gross negligence on the lender's part. With this sworn statement and the IP logs from the crypto transfer, we have enough to file a civil injunction against Apex Financial to halt the foreclosure. We can also force them to remove your name from the debt instrument. I exhaled, the knot in my stomach loosening just a fraction. Thank God. However, Garrett continued, shifting his gaze back to Mia. This statement also constitutes a confession to accessory to wire fraud. Mia, I am not your lawyer. My fiduciary duty is to Sarah. You need to understand that when I hand this recording over to the district attorney and the financial crimes unit, you may be indicted. Mia let out a small, terrified sob and buried her face in her hands. Will she go to prison? I asked. I didn't want to care, but she was 22 and an idiot. I wasn't a monster. First offense? Likely probation and massive restitution, Garrett said clinically. But she will have a felony record. That's unavoidable now. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I will file the injunction against Apex this afternoon. Sarah, your job right now is to survive the fallout. Your mother was arrested last night, which means she's sitting in county lockup until arraignment. Do not post her bail. Do not answer calls from the jail. Just go to work, keep your head down, and let the machinery work. I nodded, stood up, and pulled Mia out of the chair. We took the elevator down to the lobby in silence. I ordered Mia an Uber back to my apartment and told her not to touch anything. Then, I walked the 4 blocks to my office building. It was the first of the month. My rent for the downtown loft was due, along with my auto insurance and my own utility bills. The $42,500 emergency fund was gone, but I still had my own personal checking account, the one I had opened at a completely different bank 10 years ago, specifically to keep my money separate from the family's endless drain. It had just over $9,000 in it, enough to cover my bills, pay Garrett's retainer, and ride out this nightmare until the fraud claims cleared. I sat down at my desk, booted up my computer, and logged into my banking portal to initiate the rent transfer to my landlord. The screen loaded. I stared at the dashboard. My checking account balance read $0. Directly below the balance, in stark, bright red text, was a banner, account restricted, legal hold. Please contact your branch. My heart stopped. A cold sweat instantly broke out on the back of my neck. I refreshed the page. The red banner stayed. I clicked into the transaction history. There were no withdrawals. There were no mysterious purchases. There was just a single, devastating line item timestamped at 4:15 a.m. that morning. Civil levy hold Apex Financial Holdings $50,000 in dollars. My breath hitched. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed the customer service number on the back of my debit card. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the phone on the desk and had to pick it back up. After 10 agonizing minutes of hold music, a representative from the bank's legal department finally came on the line. Yes, Miss Whitfield, the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. I see the restriction here. We received a court-ordered writ of garnishment this morning from a creditor listed as Apex Financial Holdings. That's a fraudulent loan. I practically shouted, abandoning my usual professional restraint. The few people in the cubicles near my office looked up. I forced my voice down to a harsh whisper. I filed a police report yesterday. It's identity theft. They can't just take my money. I understand this is frustrating, the representative recited flawlessly, reading from a script. However, the creditor enacted a cross-collateralization clause based on a default status and a flagged fraud risk. Because your name and social security number are on the primary loan document, they have the legal right to secure assets across any linked financial institutions to satisfy the debt until a judge officially rules the contract null and void. They froze everything, I said, my voice cracking. My rent is due today. I'm very sorry, ma'am. We cannot lift the levy without a direct release order from the issuing court or a retraction from the creditor. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up the phone. I sat there in my ergonomic office chair, staring at the zero-go cents on my screen. Mom hadn't just ruined her own life. She hadn't just destroyed the family home. In her desperate, flailing attempt to keep herself afloat, she had triggered a financial tripwire that had just effectively frozen my entire existence. I had no emergency fund. I had no checking account. I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't buy groceries. Apex Financial knew exactly what they were doing. Duncan, the loan officer, had likely panicked when my credit freeze hit the system yesterday. He knew the loan was dirty. So, before the police could formally intervene, Apex rushed an emergency levy through a rubber stamp magistrate to lock up my cash. They were holding my legitimate money hostage to guarantee they got paid for Mom's fraud. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down. It was Garrett. I answered it, putting it on speaker. They froze my accounts, Garrett. Apex found my primary checking and levied it. I have nothing. I know, Garrett said, and his voice was tighter, faster than it had been in his office 30 minutes ago. I just pulled the emergency court filings. Apex isn't just a sleazy title loan company, Sarah. They're an aggressive private equity firm. They specialize in distressed asset acquisition, and they aren't waiting for the foreclosure timeline. What does that mean? It means they filed an emergency eviction notice on the Denver property an hour ago, citing criminal destruction of collateral, Garrett said. And because your name is on the deed, you are listed as the primary defendant. If we don't get a judge to grant this injunction by tomorrow morning, they aren't just taking your money. They're going to hold you legally liable for the condition of a house you don't even live in. How do they know about the condition of the house? I asked, my voice tight. It hasn't even been 24 hours since the levy dropped, because when the police arrested your mother outside your apartment last night, they dispatched another unit to the Denver property to locate Jake, Garrett explained, the rapid clicking of his keyboard audible in the background. They were looking to bring him in for the attempted vehicle fraud. When the officers arrived, they found the front door standing wide open. The sliding glass door in the dining room was shattered. The interior was completely trashed from whatever tantrum he threw before he took off. When property is abandoned and unsecured with signs of forced entry or vandalism, the police are obligated to notify the line holders on record to secure the premises. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands into my forehead. So Apex got the call. They got the call at 6 LOAM, Garrett said. And because they are aggressive, they didn't just board up the window. They used the police report as grounds to file an emergency preservation order and a civil levy against the guarantors to cover the depreciation of the asset. That's how they froze your checking account so fast. They pushed it through a magistrate as an ex parte emergency motion. Garrett, I have literally $0 to my name right now. My rent auto drafts at 5 p.m. today. It's going to bounce. My electricity is going to bounce. Call your landlord. Explain that you are the victim of identity theft and there is a temporary legal hold on your accounts. Ask for a 48-hour grace period, he instructed, his tone shifting into pure crisis management. Do not offer any more details than that. I am filing the injunction against Apex right now. We have Mia's sworn statement and the police report. No judge is going to let them keep a levy on a victim of documented wire fraud, but the courts move at their own pace. It might take until tomorrow morning to get a signature to release the funds. Can you survive until tomorrow? I looked at the $0. Zero on my monitor. I opened my desk drawer and grabbed my physical wallet. I counted exactly $14.60 in crumpled bills and loose change. I have $14, I said. Buy some cheap groceries and go straight home after work. Do not use your credit cards, they are locked anyway. Don't answer unknown numbers. I will call you the absolute second I have the judge's order. He hung up. I set the phone down on the desk. The office around me was humming with normal, everyday corporate life. Phones were ringing. Someone by the water cooler was laughing about a bad date. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. It felt surreal, like I was existing behind a thick pane of soundproof glass. 10 years of perfect financial discipline. 10 years of sacrificing my 20s, my college education, my social life, just to make sure the math always worked. And in 3 weeks, my mother and brother had reduced me to $14 and a looming eviction from a house I didn't even live in. I took a deep breath, smoothed my blazer, and reached for my mouse to pull up the quarterly reconciliation spreadsheet. If I was going to be completely broke until tomorrow, I at least needed to keep my job. 10 minutes later, an Outlook notification popped up in the corner of my screen. It was an email from Petra, the director of finance, and my direct supervisor. Sarah, please come to my office immediately. Close the door behind you. The cold sweat that had just started to dry on the back of my neck returned instantly. Petra didn't send vague emails. She was a fiercely competent, no-nonsense woman who usually just shouted across the cubicles if she needed a file. I locked my computer, stood up, and walked down the carpeted hallway to her corner office. I stepped inside and pushed the heavy glass door shut until it clicked. Petra was sitting at her desk. She didn't look up right away. She was staring at a printed document resting on her keyboard. Next to her, sitting in the secondary guest chair, was Ellis, the head of our human resources department. My stomach bottomed out completely. Sit down, Sarah, Petra said, her voice unusually quiet. I sat in the remaining leather chair. I kept my posture perfectly straight, folding my hands in my lap so they wouldn't see the slight tremor in my fingers. Petra picked up the piece of paper and turned it around, sliding it across the polished wood desk toward me. I didn't need to read the fine print. I recognized the formatting. It was a corporate garnishment order. HR received this via certified courier 20 minutes ago, Petra said, folding her hands tightly on the desk. It's a court-ordered writ of wage garnishment, issued by a magistrate judge, filed by a private equity firm called Apex Financial Holdings. It states that you are in default on a $50,000 secured loan, and they are legally compelling this company to withhold 25% of your net pay until the debt is satisfied. I stared at the paper. Apex hadn't just gone after my checking account. They had carpet-bombed my entire financial footprint. They knew exactly where I worked because Mom had given them my old W-2s and pay stubs to secure the loan. Petra, this is a fraudulent claim, I said, keeping my voice as steady as humanly possible. My mother and brother stole my identity. They forged my signature on a title loan last week. I discovered it yesterday, froze my credit, and filed a felony police report. I spent this morning at my lawyer's office drafting a civil injunction. Apex is rushing this through to secure funds before the judge officially voids the contract. Petra looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. It was deeply, profoundly sympathetic, but she was still the director of finance. I believe you, Sarah, Petra said softly. You are the most meticulous bookkeeper I have ever managed. You don't make mistakes. But my belief doesn't override corporate policy. Ellis cleared his throat and leaned forward. Sarah, your position here requires you to manage company ledgers, authorize payroll, and handle vendor disbursements. You have direct access to millions of dollars in corporate capital. Company policy dictates that any employee in the finance department who is subject to an active civil fraud levy or severe financial distress must be temporarily suspended from their duties. It's an insurance liability. We can't have someone with a massive active garnishment order moving company money. The air left my lungs in a slow, silent rush. You're suspending me. We are placing you on unpaid administrative leave, Ellis corrected gently, pending the resolution of this court order. We aren't firing you. If your lawyer gets a judge to vacate this writ of garnishment, you can return to work the exact same day. But until I have a signed piece of paper from the county court saying this levy is dead, I have to lock your system access. My accounts are frozen, I whispered. It slipped out before I could stop it. The professional wall I had been holding up finally cracked. They levied my personal checking account this morning. I have no access to my own money. If you stop my pay. Petra closed her eyes briefly, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her face. I am so sorry, Sarah. I really am. But my hands are tied. It has already disabled your portal login. You need to pack up your personal items. I didn't argue. There was no point. They were doing exactly what I would have advised them to do if I were auditing the company. A bookkeeper under a $50,000 fraud levy is a walking red flag. I stood up. I left the garnishment order on the desk. I walked back to my cubicle, grabbed my coffee mug, my spare sweater, and my framed CPA certification, and put them in a canvas tote bag. My coworkers watched me in confused silence as I walked out the front doors of the building at 11:30 in the morning. The wind off the Denver streets was biting. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and started walking. I couldn't take the light rail because I couldn't reload my transit card. I couldn't call a cab. I walked the 2.5 miles from the corporate park to my downtown loft, my shoes blistering the backs of my heels, the $14 sitting in my pocket like a bad joke. On the way, I stopped at a discount bodega on the corner of my street. I bought a 2-pound bag of dry rice, a bag of dried black beans, and a carton of eggs. It came to $11.40. I walked into my apartment building and took the elevator up. When I unlocked my door, the apartment was warm and entirely too quiet. Mia was still sitting exactly where I had left her that morning, curled up in the corner of my sofa, staring blankly at the wall. The television wasn't on. She hadn't moved. I set the grocery bag down on the kitchen island. I'm going to make some rice, I said, my voice hollow. Mia finally blinked and looked over at me. Why are you home so early? Because the private equity firm that Mom gave my pay stubs to just filed a wage garnishment against me, I said, pulling a pot out of the bottom cabinet. And because I work in finance, having a $50,000 fraud levy attached to my name makes me a liability. I was put on unpaid leave. I don't have a job until Garrett fixes this. Mia's face crumbled. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest, burying her face in her arms. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Apologies don't buy groceries, Mia. We have rice and beans. That's what we're eating until the judge signs the injunction. I turned on the faucet and started rinsing the rice. The mundane, mechanical motion grounded me slightly. Measure the water. Turn on the stove. Set the timer. Manage the variables you can control. As I set the lid on the pot, Mia's cell phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. She jumped, startling as if it were a physical blow. She stared at the screen. Don't answer it if it's Mom or Jake, I warned, turning around and leaning against the counter. It's a restricted number, she whispered. Let it go to voicemail. She didn't touch it. It buzzed continuously, echoing against the hardwood floors. Finally, it stopped. The silence returned for exactly 3 seconds. Then, it started buzzing again. Same restricted number. I walked over, picked up her phone, and answered it, putting it on speaker but keeping the phone in my hand. I didn't say hello. Mia? It was Jake. His voice was erratic, breathless, and underscored by the loud, rushing sound of traffic. He sounded panicked, but beneath the panic was the familiar, entitled edge of anger he always carried when things didn't go his way. It's Sarah, I said flatly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Where's Mia? She's with me. You don't get to talk to her. You psychotic bitch, Jake hissed, the fear in his voice instantly morphing into venom. Do you have any idea what you just did? The police were at the house this morning. They were looking for me. Mom is in jail. Because you threw a tantrum over some paperwork. Because you tried to buy a Toyota Tacoma with my social security number, Jake. That's wire fraud. It's a federal crime. It was family money. He screamed into the phone. It was our equity. You were hoarding it. It was a $50,000 title loan that you blew on a crypto scam. I stared down at Mia, who was shrinking further into the sofa cushions. Where are you right now? I'm not telling you shit. You're trying to send me to prison. You're sending yourself to prison. Apex Financial knows the house is empty. They filed an eviction and a civil levy this morning. They froze my accounts, Jake. Every single cent I have is locked up because of the loan you and Mom took out. Jake laughed. It was a harsh, desperate sound. Good. Sucks to be broke, doesn't it? Welcome to the real world. You realize that means I can't bail Mom out, right? I said coldly. She's sitting in county lockup, and I have $0. Her bail hearing is probably tomorrow. Who is going to post her bond, Jake? You? The silence on the line was thick and immediate. The reality of the situation finally seemed to pierce his delusion. I don't have any money, he muttered defensively. I know you don't. You lost $30,000. So unless you have a secret stash somewhere, Mom is staying in jail. I paused, letting the weight of it settle over him. You need to turn yourself in. You broke a window, you trashed the house, and the cops have the IP logs from the crypto transfer. Running is only going to make the final sentence worse. I'm not going to jail for trying to help this family, Jake spat, his voice trembling slightly now. Tell Mia she owes me. Tell her to check her Venmo history and see who fronted her rent last month when her gym membership bounced. I need her to wire me whatever she has. She has nothing. I have nothing. You are completely on your own. You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll see. The line clicked dead. I dropped the phone back onto the coffee table. Mia was staring at me, her eyes red and swollen. Is he going to come here? She asked, her voice cracking. He doesn't know where I live, I said. He only knows I moved downtown, and the building has security. I walked back to the kitchen and turned the heat down on the stove. The water was boiling over the edges of the pot, hissing violently against the hot metal burner. I wiped it up with a towel, my movements slow and deliberate. We ate the rice and beans in silence. When the sun went down, the apartment grew freezing cold. I didn't turn on the heat. I couldn't risk the utility bill pulling against my negative balance and incurring overdraft fees I couldn't pay. I wrapped myself in a heavy blanket and sat by the window, watching the city lights of Denver flicker in the dark. At 9:00 a.m. the next morning, my cell phone rang. It was Garrett. I answered on the first ring. Did Did you get it? I got it, Garrett said, his voice crisp and professional, but carrying an unmistakable note of triumph. The judge took one look at the police report, the forged signatures, and Mia's sworn affidavit. He signed a temporary restraining order against Apex Financial. It immediately halts the eviction, voids the wage garnishment, and orders the immediate release of your personal checking accounts. I slumped against the window frame, my legs practically giving out. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Don't thank me yet. The order was just transmitted to your bank's legal department. It might take them 2 to 4 hours to process it and unfreeze the funds. You need to call your landlord right now and tell him the money will be there by this afternoon. I will. There's something else, Garrett said, his tone shifting, becoming heavier. I was at the courthouse filing the paperwork when the morning arraignment docket was posted. Your mother was on it. I stood back up, clutching the phone tighter. Did they set bail? They did. The district attorney hit her with 2 counts of felony identity theft, 1 count of wire fraud, and uttering a forged instrument. But because she's a first-time offender with local ties, the judge granted bond. It was set at $50,000. She needs 10%, $5,000 to walk out. I don't have $5,000 to spare, I said immediately. And even if I did, I wouldn't pay it. I'm not bailing out the woman who tried to steal my future. You don't have to, Garrett said quietly. Someone already did. I frowned. The relief I had just felt instantly evaporating. What? Who? Jake is broke. Mia has nothing. I told Conrad yesterday to freeze his credit and stay away. Who posted $5,000 in cash for her? I pulled the bond registry, Garrett replied. The premium wasn't paid in cash. It was secured through a bail bondsman, backed by a physical collateral pledge. What collateral? The deed to the Aurora house, Garrett said. She pledged her remaining equity in the property to a bondsman at 7 Delico Am this morning. And Sarah, the bondsman accepted it, because on paper, she's still the primary resident and co-owner. She's out, Sarah. Your mother was released from county lockup an hour ago. I stopped breathing for a second. How? The house is in pre-foreclosure. Apex just filed an emergency levy and an eviction notice on it. The equity is a complete fiction. Exactly, Garrett said. The sharp, rapid clicking of his keyboard echoed over the line. Bail bondsmen operate on risk assessment. When she filled out the collateral application this morning, she claimed the property was free and clear of secondary liens, and she omitted the pre-foreclosure status of the primary mortgage. She signed a sworn financial affidavit stating the house had $300,000 of unencumbered equity. I stared at the wall of my apartment, my brain struggling to process the sheer magnitude of her stupidity. She lied to a bail bondsman. She committed felony fraud to secure her release from a felony fraud arrest. Garrett corrected, a dark, cynical amusement creeping into his tone. Bondsmen do not mess around with their money, Sarah. They are not like Apex. They don't file civil levies and wait for a magistrate. When a bond is secured by fraudulent collateral, they revoke it instantly. So what happens now? I am currently drafting a very polite email to the owner of the bonding agency, Garrett said. I am attaching a copy of the Apex injunction, the primary mortgage default notice, and the police report detailing the forged title loan. Once they read it, they will realize they are holding a worthless piece of paper. They will file an emergency revocation with the court, and they will send their own recovery agents to the house to bring her back in. How long will that take? Usually, a few hours. Stay in your apartment. Let the bank process the unfreeze on your checking account. Pay your rent. Do not answer the door. I hung up. I walked back into the living room. Mia was still sitting on the couch, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. Was that the lawyer? She asked weakly. Mom is out of jail, I said. Mia's face immediately flooded with relief. She actually smiled, the first genuine expression I had seen on her face in days. She's out? Did she call Mr. Brennan? Is she coming to get me? She's out because she used the house as collateral for her bond, I continued, crushing her brief spark of hope without a second thought. But she lied to the bondsman about the liens. Garrett is sending them the real paperwork right now. They're going to revoke her bail by this afternoon, Mia. She's going right back. The smile vanished. You're sending her back? I am not doing anything, I said, my voice hardening. Mom did this. Mom forged my name. Mom dragged you into a predatory loan office. Mom trashed the house, and Mom lied to the court this morning. Stop looking at me like I'm the villain. I'm just the one refusing to pay the ransom anymore. I grabbed my laptop off the kitchen island and logged back into my banking portal. I hit refresh. The bright red restricted banner was gone. I clicked on my checking account. The balance read $9,142.50. The breath left my lungs in a shaky, exhausting sigh. I immediately initiated the transfer for my rent. I paid my electric bill. I paid my internet bill. Then, I transferred Garrett's $5,000 retainer fee straight to his firm's trust account. I watched the money disappear, leaving me with a little over $1,000 to my name. It didn't matter. It was mine. It was clean. At 2:15 p.m., Mia's cell phone rang. It wasn't a restricted number this time. It was a local Denver number. Mia looked at it, her hands trembling, and then looked at me. Answer it, I told her. Put it on speaker. She swiped the screen and set the phone on the coffee table. Hello? Mia, pack your bags. I'm coming to get you. It was Mom. She sounded breathless, manic, and completely detached from reality. I could hear the engine of a car running in the background. It sounded like a cheap rideshare. Mom? Mia stammered. Where are you? I'm in an Uber headed to Sarah's building. We are leaving. I spoke to Silas Brennan an hour ago. He said what Sarah is doing is illegal retaliation. We are going to sue her for emotional distress and false imprisonment. Jake is meeting us at a hotel in Aurora. I stepped forward and leaned over the coffee table. You aren't coming anywhere near my building. There was a sharp pause on the other end. Sarah, Mom sneered, the venom practically dripping through the speaker. You think you're so smart. You think you can just snap your fingers and lock me in a cage? I own that house. I used it to walk right out the front doors of the jail. You have absolutely no power over me. Did you read the fine print on your bond agreement? I asked, keeping my voice dead level. What are you talking about? The part where it says any misrepresentation of collateral is grounds for immediate surrender. Garrett sent the bonding agency the Apex lien and the pre-foreclosure notice 2 hours ago. The silence on the line was absolute. Even the background noise of the Uber seemed to quiet down. You're lying, she finally hissed, but her voice was shaking. The deed is in my name. The equity is mine. The equity is negative $50,000, and the deed is currently frozen by a federal fraud investigation. The bondsman filed the revocation at 1 o'clock. They are legally authorized to detain you, Mom, and unlike the police, they don't have to wait for you to open the door. You're lying, she screamed, her voice cracking into genuine hysteria. Mia, don't listen to her. Get your things right now and come downstairs. She's not coming with you, I said. And if you show up here, the concierge will call the police, and you'll catch a trespassing charge on top of the wire fraud. Tell the Uber driver to pull over. Save yourself the humiliation of being dragged out of the back seat. I reached down and ended the call. I picked up Mia's phone, opened the settings, and blocked the number. I set it back down on the table. Mia didn't protest. She just stared at the blank screen, wrapping her arms around her stomach. Is she really going back? Mia whispered. Yes, and she did. Garrett called me at 5 p.m. The bonding agency had intercepted her Uber less than a mile from my apartment building. They pulled her out, handcuffed her on the sidewalk in front of rush hour traffic, and drove her straight back to the county intake facility. Because her bail had been revoked for fraud, the judge refused to set a second bond. She was remanded to custody pending trial. The house of cards didn't just collapse, it burned to the ground. 2 days later, the police caught up with Jake. He had tried to check into a cheap motel in Colorado Springs using a credit card he had opened in Conrad's name years ago. The front desk clerk flagged the mismatched ID and called the local precinct. He was arrested in the lobby, carrying nothing but a duffel bag of dirty clothes and the keys to a stolen Toyota Tacoma he had managed to hotwire off a dealer lot the night before. He was charged with grand theft auto, identity theft, and felony evasion. Mia's reality check came the following Monday. I walked her into the district attorney's office alongside Garrett. She sat in a cold, windowless room and formally confessed to signing the fraudulent guarantor paperwork at Apex Financial. Because she cooperated, and because Garrett masterfully painted her as a naive victim of our mother's coercion, the DA offered her a plea deal. 3 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent felony record. When we walked out of the courthouse, I stopped on the concrete steps and handed her a printed piece of paper. What is this? She asked, wiping her eyes. It's a sublet agreement for a room in a house near the university, I said. It's $500 a month. I paid the first month's rent and the deposit. The landlord is expecting you this afternoon. She stared at the paper. I'm not staying with you? No, Mia, you aren't. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from that house that's hiring baristas. You're going to apply tomorrow. You're going to work. You're going to check in with your probation officer, and you're going to learn how to pay your own bills. I don't know how to do any of that, she cried, shrinking back. Then you'll figure it out, I said bluntly, just like I did when I was 16. I ordered her an Uber, put her in the back seat, and watched her drive away. I didn't feel guilty. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The legal machinery took another 3 weeks to fully clear my name. The civil judge officially ruled the Apex title loan null and void due to proven forgery. Apex was forced to release the lien on the house and drop the wage garnishment against me completely. The day I got the finalized court order, I walked into Petra's office and placed it on her desk. She read it in silence, then looked up at me and smiled. Welcome back, Sarah, she said. HR will process your back pay for the mandatory leave by Friday. I went back to my desk, logged into my computer, and started reconciling the quarterly ledgers. The Denver house went to public auction 2 months later. The bank took it back for a fraction of what it was once worth, wiping out the last remaining physical tie to my childhood. The granite counters, the freezing living room, the locked bedroom door where Mom used to hide. It all belonged to a holding company now. I never visited Mom in jail. I ignored the collect calls from the facility. When Silas Brennan tried to send a letter demanding a settlement for abandonment of familial duty, Garrett threatened him with a bar grievance for frivolous litigation, and the strip mall lawyer vanished like smoke. On a quiet Tuesday evening, in December, I came home from work. The city outside was coated in a fresh layer of snow, the streetlights reflecting off the white pavement. I unlocked the door to my loft. It was exactly as I had left it. Spotless, quiet. The thermostat was set to a comfortable 72 degrees. I walked into the kitchen, dropped my keys on the island, and poured myself a glass of cheap wine. I walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the skyline. My credit score was back to 810. My bank account was my own. Nobody was screaming in the hallway. Nobody was demanding a transfer. Nobody was holding me hostage to their own incompetence. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted incredible.